Good evening and welcome to the March 20th meeting of the Minnetonka Economic Development Advisory Commission. The schedule and tentative agendas can be obtained by calling the Community Development Department or by checking the city website at minnetonkamin.gov. Copies of tonight's agenda and staff reports are on a podium outside of the chambers. This meeting is televised and web streamed live on the city's website. Listening devices are available upon request, and if you wish to use a device, please city staff located outside council chambers in the audio-visual control room. I added this sentence, so hope you don't object, but the Economic Development Advisory Commission, the EDAC, advises the City Council regarding economic development, housing, and redevelopment matters in the city. From a broader standpoint, the EDAC attempts to find balance between individual rights and community responsibilities as they make their recommendations. Individual rights are easy to understand. Community responsibilities are more subtle, but the idea is that we as members of the community agree to limit our individual rights for the common good of the group. The Community Development Department, the Economic Development Advisory Commission, and the City Council are responsible for managing this sometimes difficult balancing act. And we ask that you keep this broader perspective in mind as we review tonight's subject matter. Before we can begin, please make sure that your cell phones are turned off. Tonight's agenda includes introduction of two new commissioners, Nicole and Scott, and I'll ask them for a little bit of a background. And then the only action item that we have tonight will be approval of the January 16 minutes. Otherwise, the other items on the agenda are informational. And I'd like to take special point to point out item C under 5, which is the Economic Improvement Plan Program, and particularly for all members, but for the new members, EIP is a really important function that I think that the EDAC takes on in our advice and our recommendations to the City Council. So I think from that standpoint, we're going to have, according to Alicia, multiple chances to take a look at that over the course of time. So I think with that, I would like to, first of all, let's have roll call, then we'll approve agenda. We'll move minutes to, if it's all right, we'll move minutes to once Commissioner Cebulka gets here. So roll call, please.
Connors? Here. Duginski Cebulka will be a couple minutes late. Falk is excused today. Haig?
Here.
Ramatka?
Here.
Jacobson?
Oh, no.
Jin. I was like, wait a minute. There we go. Yeah. Jin. Yeah. That's hilarious. Okay. And I'm missing Anderson.
Here.
All right. And then on to the approval of the agenda.
Yes, so I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Or you'll make that motion? Thank you. Have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Can we just do that as a all in favor say aye?
Sure.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. now that we have Commissioner Cebulka here, we can go back and go back to our regular agenda item for approval of minutes. So attached in your package are the minutes from the January 16th, 2025 meeting. And I think that we have, actually, we still don't have 4 members that were here. Because David was not. And so I think we'll
delay it until then.
Yeah, I think we'll just table that to,
Yeah, no problem.
to the next meeting.
Yeah, we'll just use a summary for now and then
Okay.
get the final ones approved.
All right, so with that, let's start with Nicole. Welcome to the EDAC, and kind of in light of the mayor's talk downstairs with the state, just give us a little background on yourself and why you wanted to join the EDAC.
I'm Nicole Jen, and I have lived in Minnetonka for about 2.5 years. I bought a townhome, which I love, and I live there with my 2 dogs. And I currently work for Target in merchandising. Oh, thank you. Sorry, new girl. I joined the EDAC because I think there's a lot in our world right now that feels uncontrollable, and you feel like you don't have a place to make an impact. And I think the best place to start is in your local community. And with my business experience at Target, I thought this would be a great place to contribute to future generations.
Thank you. Thank you. Scott, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. I've been a resident of Minnetonka twice. Once, my wife and I bought our first house near Scenic Heights Elementary, moved to Carver, and then returned in 2019, right before the pandemic, with 2 little kids, and have really enjoyed this community. We came back because we felt disconnected and wanted a place where we felt more connected. And my kids attend Glen Lake Elementary, and I serve on the board of the Glen Lake Mighty Mites Baseball Association. And I'm just attracted to how outstanding this community is, and want to use my background in real estate development and community development and affordable housing, and found this a good forum to do that.
Good, thank you. Well, welcome both.
Thank you.
Moving on agenda-wise, I think we are to business items. So I think we start with the business survey and kind of a highlight of the business survey.
Yes, thank you. I am very pleased this evening to introduce you to Peter Leatherman, if you aren't already familiar with Peter's work. But before I tell you all about Peter, I first wanted to give you some context for our business survey. So we conducted our first business survey in 2021 to learn how businesses were doing coming out of the pandemic and see how they were feeling about their future, what sort of resources they would like to see from the city, and to help us create plans for our work here. And from those results, we made changes. We produced more publications of the Thrive newsletter that goes out quarterly to businesses, and we built up our business email list. We worked on informational brochures, gathered market data through our Visitor 360 reports, created new loan programs, including our emergency loan, forgivable loan program, and our code compliance loan programs, and understanding how our businesses feel about the work they're doing and the relationship they have with the city helps us inform the work that we do. So now, a few years later, 3 years later, we went back to the community to hear about how businesses were feeling now. And we chose to work with Morris Leatherman Company. We chose to work with Peter because he has been doing this work for over 3 decades. He's a public opinion researcher and has actually been doing the city's residential survey for over 20 years. So he really understands this area, understands how to do surveys in a way that garner the most accurate results. I love his style because he goes out and actually phones people and to find their results instead of having people opt in. So we know that when people are choosing to take a survey, it typically is because they have stronger feelings about something, and it may not be as accurate as the way that he proactively goes out to the community and samples a statistically significant population and helps us know a better picture of who it is that we are serving here in Minnetonka. So with that, I will turn it over to Peter. I will say, if any of you have a personality type like mine, you're going to see these results and you're immediately going to think, what now? Okay, what should we do? Let's get on it. And so I will encourage you to do what I need to remind myself as well, which is to slow down a bit here. Today we are going to take in this information, and then down the road we're going to start talking about what it is that we should do with these results. So, thank you, Peter.
Sounds good. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. And I don't make the calls. I have phoners that make the calls. I can't do what they do because it is a special skill in order to talk to, the thousands of people that they do over the course of a typical year. Just to review for everybody what we undertook for the city. We spoke with 400 randomly selected residents, business owners and managers across the community between January 16th and February 12th. Part of the reason we're able to do the sampling that we do the way we do it is it takes a long time to do it right. Unlike the polling that you see around presidential races and what's in the paper that call over the course of 2 nights and whoever answers the phone and then you reweight the date and everything. Approaching 60% of these surveys were completed via appointment versus when it's versus when we call them. We make it as convenient as possible for the person to take the call to mitigate the refusal rate down at 5.5%. Average interview time was 17 minutes. It was a longer survey. And the 400 samples projectable to plus or minus 5% in 95 out of 100 cases. The size of the sample determines the margin of error, not the percent of the universe. So, putting up some demographics, the profile of the business community. First off, how long has the business been in the city of Minnetonka? A long time. 43% have been in the community for over 20 years. You do have the pandemic impact. You haven't had a lot of new businesses over the past 5 years, only 6%. So the typical business comes in at right about 19 years of being in the city of Minnetonka. They were able to self-classify themselves. We read the categories and they indicated which category best fit the description of what their business does. You can see 3 of them actually make up 60% of the business community: retail, personal service, and restaurant. Then we drop down to single digits from personal service, automotive, hospitality. Continuing with the demographics, how many employees do they have? For full-time employees, 48% have between 1 and 10 full-time employees. We have 13% that have over 50 employees. The typical business in the city has approximately 12 full-time employees, and for part-time, they have about 6. So if you combine it, somewhere in the high teens is the typical business if we're looking at full-time and part-time employees. Is this reverbing or is it just echoing in my head? Is it good? Okay, just for the recording's sake, I wanted to. The age of the respondent was, very few people. Good retirement planning, as I joked at the Chamber of Commerce. Not a lot of over 65-year-olds in the community, but 55% are 14 to 64, 43% are under the age of 39. We asked for the ethnicity of the business owner: 81% white, 8% Asian, 6% Black African American, 3% Latino, and then 1% each American Indian, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, and 1% refused. We asked the gender. Men outnumbered women in this by 7%, with 1 indicating non-binary. Did they own or were they tenants of their business location? 7% more owners than tenants, and then 7% indicated that they were a home-based business. Normally at this point I always ask, any questions on methodology, demographics? Good. All right, an overall assessment of the business climate. And I'll just say up front, your businesses are very content. Just completed, you know, when you own your own phone bank, I can't help myself. I continually am doing internal surveys that I share with clients. I was just presenting a statewide to the Superintendent's Association about what residents think. So I thought, let's do a metro-wide business survey last month and just gauge where those are so we have some comparisons. The rating of the business climate in the community, 98% are positive. Only 3% say only fair. It doesn't add to 100 because there is rounding. I allow it to go to 99 to 101%. But the excellent rating is more than double than what we're seeing. And that's what differentiates things. In our community survey, in business surveys, is the enthusiasm level. I always make the joke, but it's very accurate. It's hard to get Minnesotans excited about anything to say it's excellent. Oftentimes good is good enough. So a very positive feeling about the business climate in the city.
Peter, do you mind if I just ask,
Yep.
why do you think that, what it causes that overwhelmingly good and excellent for Minnesota or Minnetonka businesses?
I think overall you're going to see it. They don't have any major issues. And I think, and part of it in the mix also is the long-term nature of the business. I think where you have the median longevity at 19 years, there's a stability. As a business owner, I understand, you know, those first 5 years, you're very concerned. The ebbs and flows, you kind of overreact to things as they're coming. When you have 43% that have been in business for over 20 years, I think it provides perspective. But also, you know, there are other factors in play that we're going to see, and a lot of it has to do with the relationship with the city. What could the city do to improve the business climate? 74% say they can't think of anything. What things did come up? Lower taxes, which is about a third of what we see in the metro area survey. When we talk, taxes are the major issue right now across the state of Minnesota. And then we had a few indicate tax incentives, more development, and then some very idiosyncratic things that were less than 1% that I just collapsed down into the scattered. Not only are they positive about the current environment, they're very bullish about the future. We are seeing an uptake in public opinion about being optimistic because we're 5 years since the pandemic. And so there is a bullish nature to this, but you have a flat majority saying they're very optimistic about their future of their business. 37% say somewhat, so a combined 95% of folks indicating an optimism towards the future. Now we asked an open-ended, what's the most serious issue facing facing their business? At the top of the list is what leads the list for all businesses, and that's inflation and the cost of doing business, 16 and 10%. But both of those are about half of what we see in the metro-wide business survey. It's not as pronounced here, and I think that is also part of the stability, the longer term. You're not so worried. You're looking year to year versus month to month. But down at the bottom, you have 26% of business owners that see no problem whatsoever in the community. Now, that's open-ended because what we want to gauge is their top-of-the-mind response. And some of them told us 4 or 5 things. What we're coding is the first thing they say for this purpose because that's telling us that has the highest amount of impact. So then we went through a list. And we asked folks, is this a very serious issue, somewhat serious, not too serious, or not at all serious? You have 3 issues that lead the list for all business owners and managers. The top 2 really are a lot of out of control of government. The cost of doing business and just general economic conditions. Let's say local government. Feds and states will impact this. But 74% indicate the cost of doing business. 82% talk about the general economic conditions. The one issue, like I mentioned, when we talk about it specifically, is city taxes. 64% indicate that it's a very serious or somewhat serious issue. And then we drop down. We drop down to the 40% level. But you can see it's single digit is very serious with high rent, healthcare costs, access to capital. Then drop down and we're lack of customers, traffic congestion. We're going to do a little bit more in depth. Public transit, high-speed internet. The one other issue on here that you're much lower than what we see in our metro-wide survey is the crime rates and the impact of crime being a concern for their business. Part of its proximity to the core cities. First ring suburban communities, the business owners and managers were at 30 to 35% as a concern. So the further you go out, the less concern there is. What about their workforce? It's been very stable over the last 24 months. The number of full-time employees, 9% indicate that they've increased, 10% decreased, but 82% indicate that it's remained the same. What about the next 24 months? What's their anticipation? Stability. 75% say it'll be the same. 8% think there'll be an increase. Only 2% indicate that the number of full-time employees will decrease. The impact of the pandemic. We first asked folks, have you changed where and how employees work after the pandemic? 12% indicate that they had. Of that 12%, has it impacted the amount of space you need? Only 6%. Now, part of this goes into the type of business. You remember back to when they classified themselves. Restaurants. It's really kind of hard to change how a restaurant operates out of your house. Retail. Ridgedale's not going to be able to have employees working from home. All of those sorts of things come into play. But you do have not as many people indicating that there's been a change than they thought. We did a business survey back in 21 because we were curious on where folks were with the expectation of coming out of the pandemic someday. And over a quarter of people at that point said they expected it was going to change how they operated their business and their employees. Obviously, there's been a push for going back to work from companies. All of those sorts of things have come into play that it hasn't materialized to the level that businesses had the anticipation. Like I said at the chamber yesterday, in 2021, people thought we'd never shake hands again. We were going to be doing fist bumps. So what we thought was going to happen happened for about 50% of businesses, that expectation, but a lot of it driven by the type of business. What about the labor pool? They're very bullish on both the quality and the quantity of the labor pool. They could say excellent, good, only, fair, or poor. With the quality, 94%. With the quantity, 97%. This is markedly different from 20 and 21, where the only, fair, and poor back then, a year into the pandemic, was 40% negative. That was really concern on the shortage of employees and the quality of employees. Skills or competencies that need to be improved. This pretty much, well, I do a lot of work with school districts also, and many school districts ask the question of their residents, what skills are most important for graduates to have? Oddly enough, they don't say they need to know history, they need to know math. They say things like this, the life skills, and that's what business owners and managers are saying also. Communication, being a team player, customer service, attention to details, promptness, organization, and technology. But you can see nothing's hitting 25, 30, 35% in an open-ended question. That indicates that it's something that's really a major issue in the community for the labor force. Really, you're fine-tuning, but it is kind of the life skills portion that they're looking for, not the job-specific skills. The percent of the workforce living in Minnetonka, 27% indicate that half of their employees live in the community. 24% indicate that over 80%. The typical business comes in at about 67, 68%. So about 2/3 of their employees are residents of the community. That's about double than what we see in the metro area survey that we have. A lot more stability of employees living around Minnetonka or in Minnetonka than we see, especially like Minneapolis and St. Paul. The average commute time then, they're not traveling as far. So the typical commute for an employee comes in at about 17 or 18 minutes. What about the percent of the workforce using public transit? Well, there's not as much need for public transit when you have so many employees living in the community. 59% indicate none, 25% said 10% or less, only 16% said more than 10% of their employees are using public transit currently. City trails. This was an interesting question that the city added. I've not asked it before in other business surveys, but 32% indicated that their business was located near a city trail. We followed up with that 32% and asked, do employees or clients use a city trail to get to your business? 20% indicate that yes, they did. So the 20% of 32%, about 7% of businesses have employees or customers accessing their location using the city trails. Southwest Light Rail. First off, we asked folks where they, and we've just shifted this, you know, it was going to open in 20, then 22, now we're to 27. 68% indicated they were aware it's scheduled to open in 2027. Southwest Light Rail, along the Southwest Light Rail corridor, businesses have always been divided on this, and part of its location. If you're near the corridor, you're probably going to see it as an asset. If you're not near it, it's not going to be the asset. Plus, your businesses don't have as many folks using public transit. They live in the community. So the business community divides. 41% indicate they believe it'll be an asset, 38% say no, and 22% said, quite frankly, I'll believe it when I see it, and I'll make the assessment then. We went through a list of sustainability actions and asked the owners and managers, first off, has your company undertaken that action? That's the dark green on the chart. Then if they said no, we followed up, do you intend to take the action in the future? That's the light green, and then red is they haven't taken it and they have no plan. So 3 items actually have a third or more of businesses indicating that they had undertaken that action. Building energy audit at 42%, waste reduction and reuse at 34%, and energy efficient upgrades at 33%. Organics collection and water efficiency upgrades at 16 and 15, and 1% indicate that they had undertaken installing EV charging stations. It's kind of you see the divide though. Businesses have either done it or they don't have any plans to do it, because there's very little light green here. We had 3% indicate that they plan to do energy efficient upgrades, 1% water efficiency, and 6% talked about potentially EV charging stations. So, you know, perhaps something to think about from the city's perspective is to talk about the benefits of these 6 actions and try to drive up and get people to at least not necessarily undertake them immediately, but start thinking about these sorts of actions. Traffic congestion. Part of this is driven by location of employees. Only 10% indicate that traffic congestion has impacted their business. Who has it impacted? It's an even divide between the clients and their employees. On the public transit, only 10% said no, the city does not have enough public transit. Think back to the amount of business owners and managers that had employees using public transit. The pronounced, though, if they think that it has impacted their business, it's about employees accessing, not so much customers. Turning to city government. This chart, it combines 2 questions. First off, we asked folks their rating of the city's attitudes and responsiveness towards businesses in the community. 98% rated positively. What about a rating of city services? 100%. Chart doesn't add to 100 because of rounding, so we have 101. I allow it to go 99 to 101. But on both of these, very, very strong. And you're going to see the impact of strong ratings of city services by the business owners and managers in a few slides. Have they contacted City Hall during the past year? 23% indicate that they had. Are they satisfied with the way that contact was handled? Absolutely. 97%. And the threshold that we use for public service is 80%. positive. Because keep in mind, when folks are contacting the city, oftentimes there's an issue involved. And so that 80% threshold is really oftentimes difficult to break through. But the city has always done an excellent job, and we see it in the residential survey year after year when we break down residents' interaction with the city. The courtesy, the helpfulness, the efficiency of staff is always above 90%. I mean, this really is kind of a best practices when we talk about how the city serves residents and business owners and managers. Overall assessment then of the direction of the city, not surprisingly, they're bullish on their business. They're optimistic about the future. The overall direction, 87% say going in the right direction. This is where the impact of high quality service is very important, because this question asks folks to think about the city services you receive and the property taxes paid and rate that value. Now keep in mind, we had 2/3 indicating that city taxes is a serious problem for their business, but only 3% rate the value negatively. So even if you have perception of high taxes, it can be mitigated in the value question if those services are very well regarded. And you can see 88% favorable is just outstanding. We added local option sales tax increase to gauge business owners. Oftentimes I think I've worked with every city that's worked and passed a local sales tax option over the past few years. Normally you get to the point of doing research where you're linking it to a specific project, whether, Roseville, it was a license center, Richfield, it was parks. This was just a generic question asking folks their support. And actually business owners and managers support a local option sales tax. 61%, only 23% oppose. Part of the calculation that we see in all the data in talking about local option sales tax is the realization that it will draw money from collect taxes from folks that don't live in the community. Then hopefully that will help mitigate city property taxes. That's the calculation that people make. And the business owners and managers are making the same calculation. There's not a lot of people that feel strongly that way. This actually surprised me on this question. Only 15% of owners and managers had a strong position one way or the other. We went through a list of business programs and services offered by the city, and we asked folks first off if you were aware of it. So that's why the chart doesn't add to 100, because this is just the percent that said they were aware. If they were aware, how would they rate that service or program? So what has the highest rating? Business support services and the Thrive Minnetonka newsletter. Then we drop down to loans financing, workforce development, Elevate Hennepin County, commuter services, networking events, and the MCCD's open to business. On all of these, I go back to when you're doing an evaluation, you want 80% being positive. These are all within that, maybe, to the mid 70s, all the way up, business support services, it's over 90% positive. And so this is tapping. This isn't use. This is have they heard or seen. And so you're tapping into the grapevine and those sorts of things. So this is an opportunity also to turn some of the red blue, but also grow the bars by increasing awareness of what the city's offering. What about some specific areas for the city to focus on? Should the city have a great focus, somewhat of a focus, little or none? I've arrayed it from the great focus, the dark green, the intense position. What leads that list is investing in redevelopment at 35%, combined 64%. If we add the sum, though, what goes to the top of the list is retaining and growing existing businesses. Kind of take care of what you have here should be the focus of the city. Low interest loans, better training for workers, recruiting new businesses, attracting qualified workers, all have 50% or more. Below 50%, building traffic infrastructure, development of workforce housing, improving communication, expand collaborative workspaces, and then sustainability efforts. Finally, how informed do folks feel? In comparison, they feel very informed about city government, about 15 points higher than we typically see. Oftentimes there's a disconnect. Part of this is also driven by the number of employees that live in the community, and 80% of business owners and managers say they live in the community. So they have a connection just beyond their business, much more so than other communities have. 77% indicate they're very or somewhat informed. What is their primary source of information? It's very city-focused. The Thrive newsletter at 36%, the website at 29%, emails from the city, even the Minnetonka memo comes into play at 9%, city social media, and then the grapevine is very limited in this community, whether it's landlord, property owner, or word of mouth. Oh. And then finally, how do they prefer to receive information? On this one, I always tell clients to look at this print versus electronic. Do they want push communication, pull communication? So the push communications, the Thrive newsletter, the Minnetonka memo newsletter, so you have 45% that prefer to hold something in their hands. On the flip side, do they want to push a button on a computer? 25% email, 24% website, 4% city social media. So we have a majority, 53%, talking about some sort of electronic. Every city, every school district, every local government I work with, this is the divide. I've been doing surveys like she mentioned at the outset for over 30 years. When internet came in full force, everybody at the city's dreamed that they would be able to do electronic communications, but that shift has not happened with preference. You have very specific demographics, who's using what. The older the person is, the more likely they are to prefer to hold something in their hands, but that does not necessarily apply all the time. So that is the last one. I would just say overall, a phenomenally stable business climate, a very positive, optimistic business climate, and I think a lot of it is driven by location. Who they are and where they live. Not only is this a place of 80% of these folks for Minnetonka to be home, it translates over to how they feel about their business in the community. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Any commissioners have questions?
Yeah, please. Peter, great presentation. Every time I feel like I've seen you do them for the school district, for the city residential, and now for the business community. It's great. I was one of those people who early on had my suspicions about the methodology, but as I've dug in and over the years, I'm genuinely impressed with how robust. It's bulletproof data. It's great. And I'm glad we have it. That being said, we are a very stable, mature community, and that applies to residents as well as businesses, it sounds like.
Yes.
And I think one of the things that I'd like to challenge us on collectively is to try to maybe overweight the outreach to newer businesses, and when it comes to the residential survey, newer residents. Because while it is great that people love having a business here or being here for decades, we have to be very extra weighted or more responsive to what the needs of the next generation is. 100%. So in the case of a small business who is here, as you pointed out, they're probably going to have more concerns because they're not established. They don't know the networks. They don't know where all the resources are. So there's probably an upside to maybe expanding the outreach to smaller or newer businesses that may have more needs and may help us identify what things we can improve on. I think one of your points had some of the data about attracting businesses is just kind of a so-so score. Yeah. Collaborative workspaces, the city doesn't do much with that, and that's sort of rated not great. But those are two things. If you're a small business and you want to have a collaborative workspace, there aren't a ton of options here, and the city kind of stays out of it. And we don't do a lot to recruit businesses, and that is, I think, to a certain extent, to our detriment. So, while I think this is overwhelmingly positive, I don't want us to be complacent. Part of the reason we are in a great place is we weren't complacent 20, 30 years ago. We maybe did a good job about attracting investment and encouraging business growth, and I want us to continue to do that. So
I agree wholeheartedly with you because, a positive report doesn't mean the next one's going to be positive. And part of it also is, as an old school business owner myself, part of it is you don't know what's out there until you know what's out there. I think back, just I mentioned the superintendent's conference, and I'm going to get together and do something, go to an AI thing and kind of have more of an understanding. God help me. I don't know if this is going to impact survey research, but we'll see someday. God knows what it'll impact. But part of it is a lack of imagination when you're stable and you're optimistic. So you don't have to fix anything for what's current, but you can be more intentional about the future and the next group of business owners and managers that are coming in the city, because the demographics are going to change naturally. Part of this is driven, like I mentioned, that 5-year window, the pandemic window that we just started, or I just heard on the radio coming over here today was the 5-year anniversary of the first person dying of COVID in Minnesota back in 2020. And so that you're not going to have 6 or 7% of businesses 3 years from now that are going to be under 5 years. That's going to grow naturally. And then what does that mean for the future? Yep. Absolutely.
Any other questions for Peter?
Excuse me.
I do have one question, because it does impact one of the things that we advise the council on, which is taxes and how taxes. When the business owners said, they're high taxes, was there a comparison? I mean, was it any comparable nature to what our neighbors are? I mean, is it just a gut action, or is it actually that comparatively to St. Louis Park, Wayzata, Plymouth, Eden Prairie, we're higher?
I always say on property taxes, that question is an opinion question, not a right, wrong, educated question. We ask it in every city survey, every school district survey we do, and there are many times where the facts don't line up. We'll have 70% of people say their taxes are high, when in comparison, there's one community in the last few years that did a survey. I think they had 59% say their taxes were high. I think out of the 100 or so communities in the metro area, they were the third lowest. Okay, that talks then about communication and getting people to understand and put things in perspective, because that is absolutely a gut feeling. This is my opinion, because they might hear it from friends what their friends pay in St. Louis Park, but that's going to be then based on their friends' opinions also. And don't forget that approximately 80% of people pay no attention to the difference between school district, city, county. They just see what goes into their escrow account every month, or when they write their check every 6 months, it's just one lump sum. I always said you could do a favor for school districts and cities if everybody writes out individual checks to each, so you have an idea of what's going where. But surprisingly, folks don't want to do that.
And Chair, I think that's where the comment about value comes back into play. People don't have a sense of what they pay relative, but they know if it feels okay or not. And as you pointed out, Peter, people feel good about the value.
Yes. That's why, to me, in the city survey, it's always the most important question we ask, because it kind of pulls away, okay, I think my taxes are high and that sort of thing. It's where the rubber hits the road. This is what I'm paying for. Do I at least see value in that? And that's why it's so critical that the city services are rated highly.
Peter, this was wonderful. Thank you.
Super.
Yes. Yes, please.
Going back to your statement about how we need to be to increase our awareness of all our city services and activities, one thing that just stands out is the Thrive newsletter, and also the whole trend in general with communications is the fact that you need to have more information out there more frequently.
Yes.
So to be able to do that, we could use the information that we just received, especially on talking about the Thrive newsletter, and see, can we just improve in terms of frequency? And it could be, of course, reformatted or whatnot to accommodate that. But people just like to see information, and there are newsletters that go out every day.
Absolutely. Like I mentioned, I was doing the presentation at the Superintendent's Association talking about communication and the discussion, how do you walk that balance between print and electronic? And, one recommendation to school districts is you put things in your newsletter. The city also put things in the newsletter. You don't, though, have to do a full-page article about one of the programs or services. You could take a full page with bullets on all of them and a QR code that if the person wants to then get more information on that, it's right there, and on their phone they can go to the website to garner more information. So you can merge both of them, because in print also, as we know, social media is created. We read things in 140 characters or 168 or whatever we're at it now. So there's absolutely an opportunity to link both of them to drive people's awareness up. Keep in mind, your awareness on anything is never going to be 100%. The example I have is there's 5% of people that were not aware there was a presidential election in November of 2024. How it's possible, I don't know.
Yes, I agree. You could use certain highlights from your Thrive and put those into like daily updates or more frequent updates.
Yep.
So that's the kind of thing I'm thinking about.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Any other questions for Peter? Peter, again,
All right,
thank you.
super.
It was a
Pleasure.
really informative, really well done. I was like really interested in what you had to say and how it was presented, so thank you.
Perfect. It was a pleasure. Thank you all.
From staff's perspective, we have this tool, what happens to this tool?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So this data will build upon what we learned last time in 2021, and as Peter reminds me, you also can't have 2 data points to create a trend. You have to keep going. So the plan is to continue these business surveys in the future. As for these particular results, we're hoping that this will help inform the work of the EIP, which Alicia will be introducing, the Economic Improvement Program that Alicia will be introducing later this evening, and be presented to the City Council as well to be part of our strategic plan.
Thank you.
Great, okay.
We ready to move on to the commercial market analysis? Yes. Thank you.
Chair and members of the commission, I'll kick this off. We're doing a commercial market analysis. As you know, office has been on the minds of many people as we have some large vacancies in Minnetonka. And that kind of started us talking about what we should know about the market. We've done market studies before, but this seemed like a good time before the City Council looks at their budget process, before we look at our EIP and so forth. So we invited Brent Wittenberg tonight. He's with Marquette Advisors. We've used him before. We use him on our housing studies. We've used him in 2018 when we did another commercial study, and then we updated, I can't remember what year did we update that? Maybe
I think this is the second commercial study. We did the housing study and then an update.
We did the launch stuff, I
3
think.
or
You know, in
4 years ago.
Opus, we had done a commercial market
Right.
analysis in Opus too.
Right.
So, I mean, we've had back and forth on commercial information for a while now. But this one really took a deep dive on what's going on today. So that's why we have Brent here tonight. So Chair, with that, if I could have Brent talk about what he found.
Thank you. And hopefully everybody's had a chance to review our report. My discussion and presentation won't be as data rich, let's say. I'm hopeful that we can have some dialogue. We had a good discussion with staff a few days ago about this, and hopefully we can share some thoughts in a similar way today. But really, I think the city should be commended on doing these things, right? Julie probably thinks that I'm doing these presentations and these things for cities all the time, and I'm not. right? We do a lot of work for developers, for property owners, and so forth, and we do some work for cities. I have a planning degree. I understand your side of the table, but we're not doing enough of this work, frankly. And I think it's really important and advantageous for you to have market perspective, bringing that perspective into your planning work and into decision making. So commend you on that. And just really encouraged too by the previous presentation, as I'm sure you all are as well. And it certainly squares up with what we're seeing in the real estate market. I mean, we have our challenges as it relates to office and kind of an aging base of industrial properties and some uncertainty with respect to retail and are we headed to recession and what does that mean? But it's really a healthy market and you have a business community here that wants to be here for a variety of reasons. Stability at the city, responsiveness, and you have a staff that's been around for a little while, right? Procedures that have been in place. And I think you have a good way of doing business here, and that's reflected in the survey. And as I said, it squares up with the analysis that we provided. So we really broke our analysis into the three sectors: industrial, office, and retail, and did a fairly deep dive. And we're not going to get down into the weeds today necessarily, but we do draw some comparisons here in terms of how the city is stacking up against what we're seeing elsewhere in the metro area and in other peer communities. We look at your industrial market. Not a real deep base of properties or industrial areas, as you know, in Minnetonka. We've got an older base of properties. A lot of that supply was constructed in the 70s and 80s. Performs at a pretty high level, meaning a relatively high occupancy. That can ramp up. There's some volatility there because industrial users tend to be larger, and when you have a vacancy, it's generally a large space. So that does kind of ramp up from time to time, but you're performing very well there. Haven't seen a great deal of new supply come to market in Minnetonka, and we wouldn't anticipate that you will. A lot of that development is pushing out farther into some of the more distant communities that we reference in our report. Places like Shakopee, Rogers, even Dayton now, where there's availability of larger tracts of land, and so we're seeing a lot more warehouse and so forth development out in those areas. But in terms of your market, vacancy coming in 8.1%, slightly higher than the metro area and the Southwest. Have seen some loss of business to other locations where they're looking maybe for a little bit more modern facility, better proximity to freeways and those kinds of things, which there's not a whole lot we can do to deal with that. Comparing fairly comparably with a number of other cities in terms of occupancy, generally a little bit lower on the rent, right? So we've got an older supply of of industrial space in the community. Affordability, we're competing largely on price with that stock. Looking forward, we would anticipate that vacancy should decline. I think we're up a little bit, and we would anticipate that should come down given the lack of new supply and still relatively strong demand for space in the market. We don't anticipate any industrial development in the community. Talked about the lack of sites. We would anticipate certainly some change in use over time, right? We're already experiencing that in some parts of the community, obviously within Opus, and I would anticipate that, maybe an area like Encore Park, there might be some change in use and some more redevelopment activity there, at least explored in the coming years. And there are some spots in the report where we talk about some specific properties that may lend themselves to that, and one is on Shady Oak. It's about 60 acres, and you've got 250,000 square foot vacant building there. That's kind of a quasi-office industrial building, and there are some opportunities like that may present for redevelopment going forward. Any questions about what we're talking about here or comments so far? Jump in. Office, challenged like everywhere else, I would say. But having said that, Minnetonka is a good office market, right? You've got quality real estate. You're well served by freeways. You've got connectivity. You've got improving transit with the extension of Southwest LRT. So the connectivity elements are there. Businesses want to be here because their employees want to be here, right? We heard just earlier about the fact that a lot of your employers or employees in the community also live within the community. So that's terrific. good neighborhoods, strong demographics, good schools. Businesses are here. They've been here a long time and they want to stay. For the most part, we've got some challenges now as it relates to larger blocks of space and full buildings being left behind by some key users in the community. And it's going to take some time for that adjustment to occur and for that space to be backfilled. And, obviously there's a significant amount of space in Opus, some large buildings elsewhere that we've identified in the report that are likely to take some time to release. But at the same time, the vast majority of office buildings in the Minnetonka market are well occupied, right? If our overall vacancy rate is 16.5%, there are many, many buildings, in fact, most that are well under 10%. So we're certainly outperforming the market as a whole on that basis. Looking forward, most brokers that we talk to would tell you that the office market vacancy has probably peaked. It's been tough, right? It's been tough. But more and more businesses are bringing people back to work. For the most part, people are done shedding space. They've kind of right-sized and gotten their head around their preferred model for doing business, and are bringing more people back into the office. And it's not on a full-time basis, but we're headed in the right track in terms of office occupancy levels, and that will trend positively across the metro. We're lagging a little bit behind here in Minnetonka, and that has to do with the exodus and relocation of some businesses, and obviously it's United Health Group and it's Boston Scientific. We're hearing discussion of Digital River's another one. Opus may be doing something different going forward. So they're leaving behind pretty large chunks of space. So our vacancy rate in Minnetonka is more than likely to go up, at least in the short term. And it's going to take some time, as I said, for that, for those buildings to release. Unfortunately, we've got these big blocks of space. At the same time, most of the demand is for smaller spaces, right? The sweet spot tends to be in that 4,000 to 10,000 square foot range. We talked about what tenants are looking for. That's the size. They want the highly amenitized building. They want a location that's walkable, good connectivity to freeways, perhaps Southwest LRT, goods and services and so forth. They don't want long-term. They're looking generally for shorter-term leases. On the other side, building owners want that term. They want that longer term, obviously a little bit more rate. Businesses are looking for a turnkey situation, built out spec suites that are ready to go. And owners are wrestling with, is this justified if I can't get any term? So that's kind of where we're at in terms of office negotiations. But there's demand out there. It's just going to take some time for these larger spaces to fill. And David, your point, I think, about recruitment, and being in the business of promoting Minnetonka and bringing new business to Minnetonka, I think is right on. You nailed it there, especially with respect to office, and given the situation with some of these larger buildings, which are very, very likely to remain office buildings.
Can I ask a question in that vein? For those, we're talking about attracting potentially some large office users to some of these HQ, Class A properties. Is there, from your experience, if we're talking about attracting, but if those property owners don't go the route of breaking those up into multi-tenant properties, if we're trying to attract a large, user to the city to occupy those buildings, what, from a market standpoint, are, if any, is standard for, requests to a city? Does that make sense? Is there anything that they're looking for
kind of
from the city government if they're relocating a major headquarters location to Minnetonka?
I think it's what you would expect, right?
Yeah.
Break on taxes. I think assistance with build out, as these property owners are thinking about how and should we invest in property to attract businesses. I think maybe assistance in that regard as well. But those are the keys, I think, primarily.
And the best candidate properties are going to be the ones closest to highway access, right? So
right. And in reality, looking at the buildings, there are a couple of exceptions. The Boston Scientific facility is in the middle of Opus Park, right?
Right.
It doesn't offer that connectivity per se, save for future light rail. But by and large, these other large office buildings have that great exposure. And they're good office, right? They're good buildings. I'm thinking about UHG, and I'm thinking about their former facility at Whitewater. Those facilities are very well located relative to freeways.
I
And
just
they're
bring
good
that up
buildings.
because that's a unique situation for the city to be in, to have those,
Right.
really outstanding Class A properties, and maybe a big lift to recruit companies to occupy those spaces. So what could be done to help
It
attract?
happens though, right? I mean, congratulations on Stratasys, right? I mean, that's a terrific situation there, and that's exactly what you're talking about. We'd love to see more of that.
Brent, I would add to, and maybe you guys don't see the work on recruitment, and it's more in the background, but because no companies want to talk publicly about what they're up to in terms of leasing space. So a lot of this happens on our side, but the tenant build out phenomena has been huge in the last 2 years. So they're taking and parsing up a lot of these vacant spaces that Brent's talking about and getting them ready for rent or for lease for other users. And it's really incredible how many changes we've seen in that area. The permit numbers are just really high on tenant finishes. So that's good news. Things are
Right.
happening.
Oh, right. Good, really good points. And that, in the absence of new development, we're still seeing a lot of investment by property owners in improving these assets, which is a credit to the community. They're willing to make that investment.
And a lot of those spaces, did I recall in the report, are like 10,000 square foot on average spec?
At the
suites?
high end, I think that when you look at those spec suites, it's typically in that 4,000 to 10,000 range.
Okay.
Probably trending more towards the front end of that. Yeah. Conversions, people across the Twin Cities and other markets across the country are wrestling with this. It's challenging, right? We don't foresee, particularly with respect to the buildings that we're talking about here today, conversions are very unlikely, right? It just isn't financially feasible, and so they're very likely to remain office buildings, perhaps with a data center component. But so that releasing exercise is going to take some time. With respect to redevelopment, exciting things happening and transition happening, and will continue in Opus Park. Minneapolis Smart, we think, is trending in a good direction, and that will take some time. And that's where resources and focus ought to be, we think, initially. Close to the station, a big project, kind of a signature project within Opus. I think other opportunities will present, and obviously Boston Scientific potentially is one of those. But with Minneapolis Smart and maybe 1,000 units or more of housing, diversified, there's only so much market, right? So I think if we're going to focus in one spot, that ought to be it for a period of time. But other situations will present, and one that we talked about the other day that didn't make the slide that should is 12 Oaks. I do anticipate that area is very likely over at some point, if you haven't already heard from folks in that direction, that there could be some change in use there. It's a lot of land, older buildings, not particularly large buildings, are lacking modern amenities, obviously, and all the while strong demand for housing and other uses. So I would anticipate maybe some activity there too. Yeah.
As it relates to retail or office, I was really curious why healthcare or medical conversions. Oh, sure. As it relates to office, I was very curious why medical and healthcare was not referenced, as they're seeing a number of conversions, and even within the city of Minnetonka, a lot of healthcare spaces taking space from healthcare offices.
Not referenced in how? I mean, I don't understand.
Just it wasn't referenced around demand. It wasn't referenced at all around potential users taking existing office. We've seen even UHG, a couple of parcels in that Opus area being reconverted into healthcare. I'm just curious if you have any initial data or why it was left out.
Unintentionally, I guess. I mean, certainly there's a big component of the current demand that is medical related. That requires significant investment. Retrofitting a non-medical building to that situation is costly, but we are seeing considerable investment there, and Minnetonka is, to your credit, worth that investment, we're finding. But if there's particular data elements that you think we could potentially share with you, we have the numbers, so we can get answers to those kinds of questions. On retail, if we're ready, we wanted to close, we had this earlier in the presentation, but we wanted to close with this because it's positive, certainly, maybe more so than office. Performing really well. You know, you've got a dynamic market. Retail generally across the country, consumers and retail real estate have been resilient. And, you know, that's despite, you know, e-commerce and things related to that. Retail has done a really good job of diversifying the shopping experience, which has become much more experiential and varied, and it's not just retail anymore. You know, look at Ridgedale and how that has changed and the number of uses that are being incorporated there. Our consumers have done well across the country, locally even better, right, with our stronger demographics, and that ties out to the retail sales growth that we've seen consistently across the market. But more recently, we are seeing some signs, you know, of consumer stress. It tends to be at the, you know, lower end of the income spectrum, but there are certainly more, there's more impact by inflation. You know, it's cumulative over time. Even if it's slowing, it's cumulative, right? And so there's stress out there, and we're seeing more consumer debt and more higher default rates in consumer debt. So there's certainly concerns about recession, and, you know, how that impacts retail. The short term is probably not very much. It's going to take some time for that to play out and start to impact retail real estate, which is generally very well occupied right now. Where we are right now in the cycle, retail brands nationally tend to be better capitalized than they were in previous downturns, and so they're better positioned to kind of weather the storm for what it might be over a period of time. So that's encouraging. And locally, we heard about the long-term businesses that you have here, and they're stable and they have a real positive economic outlook. So encouraged by that. That's really good to hear. As I said, retail is performing well here. Vacancy coming in citywide at 8.2%. Most of that vacancy, I guess about a third of that vacancy, is situated in one property that I'm sure you've had conversations about, the Westridge Market property, with I think just over 130,000 square feet of available space, and that's the former Dick's property, and Bed Bath & Beyond, and Staples has gone out, but they're going to be replaced by Barnes, and then Barnes comes out of another center. So kind of some transitioning happening there, but, you know, by and large, your retail centers, inclusive of Ridgedale, operating at a very high occupancy level. Not a great deal of turnover, and if there's a downside to that, potentially, Kirsten, your point, it's the fact that new businesses maybe don't have opportunities to break into the market, right? You talk about space availability for people who haven't been here forever, right, that want to be a part of the Minnetonka market. Some limited opportunity for that, so maybe as a downside to that. Looking forward, I would anticipate that vacancy holds relatively steady. You know, I think whatever challenges we have with respect to the economy, retail's better positioned. Your centers right now are well occupied, so I think we're very likely to hold fairly steady there in a healthy market. Pretty limited in terms of the amount of new construction. We are seeing, you know, that come with more and more of the apartment deals that we're looking with. Vertical mixed use is really challenging, as I always remind staff here, but we're oftentimes seeing modest amounts of service type retail, coffee shops and those kinds of things, convenience retail, along with housing, and that can make a lot of sense in the right environment, but limited amounts and being realistic about it. Looking at the city economics, as I mentioned, you know, Westridge is problematic. David, you want to jump in? Westridge is problematic in terms of the current situation there with a lot of vacancy. I would anticipate that does set up pretty well for redevelopment. You know, could be a decent housing site, could set up for you know, some different format, different use. I think there's some uncertainty as it relates to ownership there and kind of what their objectives might be. Right, you know, we have an owner at an advanced stage and not really certain about what may the path forward for that company, right? And they happen to be the company also that owns the industrial property that we talked about that's vacant. So stay tuned and pay attention to CSM, right? As it relates to Ridgedale, definitely foresee that that will continue to be the, center of gravity, really, not only for Minnetonka, but the West Metro, right? 2/3 of your retail space is in the I-394 corridor. The success of Ridgedale, raises all boats, right, in that market. And so we foresee that that will be the center of activity going forward. Exciting to see things happening like the Kowalskis and their introduction of housing, and we anticipate some more of that in that area. I'm not going to pretend to tell you that I know exactly what JCPenney's plans are and how exactly they're performing in that location, or Macy's, right? Those are retailers that have had problems, but Ridgedale's a strong center, and I suspect that those stores are performing better than average for those types of stores nationally. So holding out some hope there, but stay tuned on that. And as I said, would anticipate more density in that area, and it's likely to be inclusive of housing. Surprise. With that, what else did we miss aside from the medical?
Good point, though.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Fair.
So we just have a few questions to ask the commission, if you want to refer to these as you kind of talk about the commercial study. Something I don't know if you mentioned this, Brent, but we looked at office use and tax capacity of the city, and, we have almost $14 billion of property value in this community. So any of these kind of commercial aspects can affect tax capacity. However, you should understand that like office is about 11% overall of our tax capacity. A lot of our tax capacity sits in residential and apartments and condos and townhomes and that sort of thing, and single family housing, of course. But it's not office. So I think even though you see lots of vacancy, it's actually not that big of a part of the city's tax capacity. It doesn't mean we shouldn't be worried about it, but you have to keep it in context of what it means for city government.
Yeah, really good, valid points, because office valuations are trending negative, right? I would say retail probably steady to slightly up, perhaps. Industrial steady, although pay attention because we've got an aging base of properties. All the while we're building a lot of apartments, so we're adding a lot of value in that way.
Thank you. Anyone else have any comments or questions for Brent?
I was really curious that, we are seeing a lot of office buildings, obviously, that are larger in nature, former headquarters. I mean, these numbers are staggering. You look at the Opus, you look at, obviously, Digital River, you look at UHG, these are large. It's not anything new. You're seeing that all over the metro, that these large office buildings are being renovated. And I was curious to hear that you thought that the most likely use would be reuse as office. In that scenario where most of the new office demand is smaller, you're going to end up with a lot of multi-tenant office buildings that have various credit, and the underwriting story is very challenging. I think you're setting yourself up potentially for a lot of instability and lease turnover potentially with smaller, and then you're taking a large building, you're trying to make multiple entrances into a multi-tenant, challenging
Right.
all around. Versus you're seeing some cities be very proactive around recruiting a master developer and thinking about more mixed use development and master developments. You made good points in that some of our master developments or the office buildings aren't well positioned necessarily, maybe from access or visibility, but there are some. I think of Boston Sci even as being a potential replay on residential or something. I'm curious, the city, and maybe this is a question for the city, is that something that the city would want to explore? Because I think the city's participation in master development and being a visionary for some of those reimagining is very critical. Any thoughts or... I know it's very early. Some of these are new announcements, too.
True. Chair and Commissioner, I think that definitely that is something that we're involved with. I know, especially on the UHG building, we went there last year and toured it with the representative of the company that owns the property. And so we're quite clued in as to what they're up to, less clued in on Boston Scientific. So it just depends on the openness to how much they will talk to the city. When we got Stratasys into their new building, very easy, and it was a good, I would call it a really good recruitment effort by the city, and we were able to quickly turn that building around, get permitting on it so they could get going, because they had some time constraints that they were dealing with. So it just depends on how easy it is to visit with them and to get in their doors, so to speak. And some are great, and some are really open, and some are not as open, or it's harder to find who those contacts are. But definitely some things going on currently. So.
And I'll just say from a council perspective, I'm sure Ms. Wishnak would back me up. Some years ago, there was a visioning process for all of Opus. So I think it was before your time, but not everything was anticipated, but we did anticipate, I mean, aside from the transit-oriented development for mostly residential, I think we figured a lot of this would change, and the issues that Ms. Wishnak is bringing up are the issues. They were the same issues then. I mean, we could have a vision, but we can't impose it on property owners, which, I mean, maybe we can persuade them. But I think your question is a really good one, and I think having toured the UHG building, it's a building that you just don't want. You don't really want to redevelop it. It is just the most stunning building. And so it would almost be criminal to bring it down. It would be so much better to find another use. We were talking to them about conversion to high-end housing because of the quality of the construction and because of the way the building is configured, like where the plumbing is, like turning that into dwellings would be extremely difficult. But oh my God, I would just cry if we redeveloped that particular building. But
Well, it's a real asset to the community, right? And so if you are going to try and recruit large companies and businesses that want to be in a large space, that's a terrific showpiece, right? So there is opportunity as it relates to that. And just to piggyback on some of the comments relating to redevelopment, I think, whether you have an interested participant in terms of the property owner, I can assure you, and you know this, that there's big interest in the development community. Developers want to be here. You've got good track record with working with those folks, a number of them. So there'll be no lack of interest to have those conversations.
I have two questions about Opus specifically, and I don't know if you can answer them. It comes up in every time we talk about Opus, the one-way street issue.
I'm not a fan of it. Is that your question?
I don't know, because you didn't get like too in the weeds. Yeah. I wanted to know sort of what you feel the effect is, or what people have expressed, what businesses have expressed about it. And then the other question that I have has also to do with companies like you, the medical. So they didn't go far. They kind of went across the street. Yeah, right. And what specifically, is there something that we can do to keep, if they're literally just moving across the street, what is it that made them just move across the street? Is it because it's the brand new building? That's, so yes.
Okay, so I want to make sure that we're clear. So United Health Group did not move to Eden Prairie. That's the Optum subsidiary. There is still presence in the two towers of United Health Group. Right. They only vacated the 9900 building. So there's still about 3,000 employees that are in those two towers. Then there's Optum as well. So it's not that their whole business moved over. So I want to make sure, because I think people hear that about like they've moved or something.
Right. They didn't leave. They're still here in a big way.
They're still here. Yeah, exactly. So, sorry, go on.
So just making sure that whatever it is, what are we hearing that we can keep them in Opus or in our
Right.
city and not going next door?
That's the next round of the business survey. I think, honestly, I mean, to incorporate, we're hearing a lot from our businesses that we have here. It's great that they're here, but why did you leave, right? So I think that's a potential component there. As it relates to the one-way streets, I think it's interesting within Opus that, we have seen a lot of housing and redevelopment activity. It's primarily at the periphery, right? And it's where the one-way streets aren't necessarily. There's a little bit of it that you have to deal with, but they've got better exposure to the freeways and to Shady Oak and better proximity to retail and restaurants and a little bit of services. I do like the Minneapolis Smart site because of size. I mean, the one-way street network is not a positive, especially as it would relate to retail, right? But with respect to housing, it can work, okay? And especially housing close to the station and that amount of land, so that can work. I think it's less important as it relates to housing, more so as it relates to commercial. But you do have to get renters back there to see it, right? And if you don't have another reason to otherwise be in Opus Park, you aren't familiar with it, it can be frustrating. But for us who are, you get over it and you deal with it. But it takes time. It's a hurdle.
And then there's one more question which has to do, and this shows up in our packets all the time, again, in Opus. So we've built all of this transit-oriented development, residential, and it was remarked in our packet tonight about, there are a lot of amenities that are missing, and part of it is because of issues with visibility. So, there's not retail. We're starting to have enough housing there to support some of these things. And when we did the visioning, the people assisting with that were saying, it'll develop organically as it can be supported. And I'm still not, we're several years down the road. Grocery. And that really is, kind of, you have all of these residents and it's a 1 square mile
Right.
area, and there's no grocery, but there's so much residential.
There's a lot, right? There was a lot there before, right, that people forget about. It's not just the new housing. There was a lot of residential, and I know you have the counts, thousands of units. You're right, we're getting to that point. I think where, smaller amounts initially. Grocery's a great idea conceptually. I think, we're challenged in that market. Grocery margins aren't so great today with inflation, right, and some of those things that they're dealing with. But I think you're getting closer as a market to being able to support some things.
Any other questions for Brent? I do have one question for staff. When we do the residential, we oftentimes form the question, but for the city's involvement, it wouldn't happen. So where are we with the potential of looking at programmatically, but for the city's involvement, that property doesn't get released?
Well, I think you didn't ask an easy question there, Chair. But what I would say is that I think that there are definitely things in what we're going to talk about next with the EIP that you can outline and talk about either conceptually or as a program. I mean, I think that, as a city, we don't have the wherewithal to help some of these businesses. That has to come through the state with Minnesota Investment Fund or the Job Creation Fund or some other fund that we've been really successful at, anything at DEED that we've been successful at in the past. So I think that it's harder today than it was maybe 5 years ago with some of those funds, but
Yeah.
if you've got something to add.
Yeah, and just building on to what Julie's saying is when you think about our HRA levy, we levy typically between about $250,000 to $300,000 for all of our programming. When the businesses come in and they need to do a big redevelopment or invest in equipment at their site, they're looking at, sometimes $20 million that they need, and that's where the state comes in. So we have access to those resources, and we're able to participate with those loan programs, but there's such large-scale needs that it's typically outside of city's purview to be able to provide that.
Yeah, we would never be able to do it just locally, for sure.
So
We have to
really-
be a partner.
Really good question, and a really important place for you to be focused, I think, right now. And to your point, to release those large buildings with large numbers of smaller users takes a long time. But if you can make a big hit with a larger company through incentives and what have you, right? Good planning, that can make a big difference. Go a lot quicker.
Thank you, Brent.
Thank you for
Appreciate it.
having me.
No, it was very enlightening. I was really enjoyed going through it and reading it.
Good.
And a lot of times I will gloss over and not take a look at that, but this one was one that really caught my attention and kept my attention. So thank you.
Thanks. Again, thanks for having me.
Economic Improvement Plan. So, like I said, this one I think for the new commissioners and for all of us from that standpoint, I think this is one of our major things that we assist the city council with. And so I think from that standpoint, I think our focus on this economic improvement plan and bringing it up, each year we do this, so this is my 7th time of going through this, for me, I think. And it's probably not quite as many, but the importance here is something that I think from the commissioner's standpoint, I can't stress enough how important it is for us to be actively looking at this and being involved with this. So, it wasn't in your packet, but it is online, and you can print the 160 pages or whatever, and it's kind of nice color. But I'm a big supporter of the pulp and paper industry, so I'm the guy who likes to get the Minnetonka memo hard copy.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Chair. I have to say that this will be my 9th iteration of the EIP, because I've just had my 9-year anniversary this month. Thank you. It's been great. I want to say that I'm trying something a little bit different this year. I've gone through this 9 years in a row, and this year, since we have some new commissioners, I wanted to take the opportunity to do a quick preview here in March and then bring the EIP back. I believe it's in May, and then again later this summer. So it the document goes back and forth between the EDAC, which informs the council study session, then council later on in the year. And then at the very end of the year, it gets approved generally in the end of September. So this is a very cursory walkthrough of the document. I'm not actually going to scroll through all 100 pages, but I am going to go over some of the highlights. And one of the new things I wanted to try this year is to give you some discussion questions, not only to discuss at the end of the presentation, but also if you want to take some time to work through the document and then get back to me with some ideas and things, trending issues or things that you'd like to see addressed in the document, I'd be happy to incorporate those into the first draft that you'll see in May. So I did print this out, and then I'll follow up with an email. So if you want to provide further feedback, you can get those to us, and we'll make sure to answer those back in May when we come back. So for our new commissioners, our EIP document it's basically fundamentally a document that illustrates all of our programming for housing, economic development, business, and transit, and then touches a little bit on our tax increment financing districts and some of our housing goals and metrics. It's expanded over the years to include a lot of different information. It provides kind of the current status and usage of our programming, and then also projections, 5-year and 10-year projections on how we think those programs will be funded or what opportunities may arise within these programs. So as I mentioned, I will kind of switch over here into the presentation, but all of these pages for our housing programs go into a lot of detail on utilization and the amount of funding that's been committed over time. And I will switch over now. So with that, as I mentioned, the schedule has been set for the EIP, so I'll take your feedback from tonight and I'll create the first draft to bring back in May. It'll go to the study session in June, then back for your final comments in August, and then back to council in September. Oops, I'm not in presentation view. Let me switch that for you. Oops.
Oh, yeah.
Uh-oh.
You're quick.
There we go. I'll get there. Okay. Here we are. So overall, the document aligns with the strategic plan. It's a but-for test, so but for the city's funding, there wouldn't be a program that aligns with the strategic goals or the comprehensive plan or our internal merit system, which is kind of going above and beyond with programming. And then which areas of economic development. As I mentioned, we cover housing, business, transportation, and redevelopment. And then, you know, are there programs that are currently undercommitted or underserved? And we'll get into that a little bit more in the presentation, but we have created new programs for underserved communities in more recent years, so that's definitely some feedback that we received from this group. So we generally have some pretty limited funding for all of the programs that we provide. Our development fund is previous tax increment financing that we use for a various number of things, including some of the studies that were presented here tonight. We use it for redevelopment planning, some of that master planning, as Ann was talking about earlier. A whole plethora of things come out of that fund. We also have a Livable Communities Fund, which is specifically now how Homes Within Reach is funded to purchase and rehabilitate single-family homes in the community and then resell them to an affordable owner. We have Community Development Block Grant, and then new this year, we're actually part of the Hennepin County Consolidated Pool. So Hennepin County went into a different methodology for its communities to pool all of the funding, and it's accessible through all of the cities that are participating in that consolidated pool. So previously we may have had $140,000 specific to Minnetonka as a community. Now we have access to the full balance for the county. So that really increases our ability to access those loan dollars for home improvements and down payment assistance. And then it also funds on a larger scale. There's a larger RFP for public service providers such as ICA and Resource West. They only have to go and present once through the consolidated pool instead of having to go to every community and ask for assistance through the communities that they represent. The housing, the HRA levy is the one tax impact to our community. It's about, I think we figured it out, it was 30 cents a household by the time we levied $300,000 for our housing program. So it's a teeny little line in our budget item, but it has a lot of impact. And over the years, that balance has grown, and it's currently sitting at about 1.2 million. However, most of the funds that are within the levy that we have on hand have been committed through previous budget cycles and programming approved through the budget. So about half is we have 2 loan programs, Welcome to Minnetonka and Minnetonka Home Enhancement. We have this year committed $100,000 of it to Pathways, which is a down payment assistance program that goes up to $75,000. We have a balance for business marketing and marketing, so that goes to printing Thrive and the mailing, because there is an expense to that. Last year, there was a emergency business assistance committed out of there. That was $50,000. We have had one loan through that program. And then this year is our last payment to Southwest LRT. We had a 10-year commitment when that came through. So we're done this year, so we won't have that in our levy this year. So it'll open up a little bit of availability there. We also more recently created an affordable housing trust fund, and this came out of the pandemic. We found that the various tools that we had existing were not did not align with providing rental assistance. So when we received some of that federal funding to help people through COVID, we needed to create this fund so we could go channel the rental assistance through that. We've had a repayment of a loan and some TIF pooling also funding this. So there's been about $5 million total. However, we've funded some affordable housing projects out of there, and more recently the Mills Twin Homes project, and then Amani Construction, which will be starting this year. And then Pathways to Home Ownership also has had some commitments out of that as well. So, and there's homelessness and rental assistance and a lot of things that come through that fund. And then more recently, we have LAHA, Local Area Housing, another acronym I have to remember. Assistance. Which is the state sales tax to go towards housing. So we received our first payment late last year. So we have about $322,000, and I think Julie and I have some creative ideas on what to do with that funding, which you'll hear about soon. So every chapter in the EIP has a summary of all of the 5-year projections and then what the total estimated costs. Some of these are pretty far-reaching, but we never know in a given day what type of project is going to walk in the door. You know, it can be all over the board in our department. So if some of these numbers seem high, it's because sometimes we don't know. But for example, the housing improvement areas, was actually over $10 million project this year with Villas at Chasewood has requested an HIA. They're through the approval process, and they're actually going to start their construction here pretty soon. But that was $12 million of HIA, and they tend to be quite a bit. So the city issues bonds for that, and it gets repaid over time. But some years we don't have any requests for HIAs, and other years we may have 1 or 2. So it really varies year to year. And that's all a response, you know, we're serving the community, responding to these requests. We're not seeking out to do these projects. We have our 2 Minnetonka Home Enhancement and our Welcome to Minnetonka programs, our Housing Trust Fund, which in this year's example was an actual page on its own. Now we have several programs that have spun out of that, so I anticipate creating new pages for each of those programs. And then the Pathways to Home Ownership program. So looking back at 2024 and 2025, we've really been focused on some key areas in our programming. The first has been Pathways to Home Ownership. There was, $500,000, I believe, committed to this in the last year and a half, and the funds were fully depleted. So we had a lot of utilization of that program, and then $400,000 was committed for 2025. So we're anticipating as spring real estate market kicks up here, we're going to see a lot more interest in that program and utilization. So it's been a great way to get people into homes because it provides up to $75,000 depending on your income. We spent a lot of time on trying to understand and serve homeless folks and their families. So we have our partnership with His House. We are looking at developing a encampment policy this year. There's been a lot of focus on that. So a lot of our attention has been on how we can grow that initiative and make it better. So we'll be reporting out on that a little bit later when we go through the annual report tonight. And then rental assistance continues to be a strong need for those that are struggling to make rent payments. We do have a mechanism to pay a month's rent to help people get current to avoid getting into that eviction process or getting out of eviction. Because I think there's a misconception with eviction filings that you may have a high number of eviction filings, but they're usually already in a workout stage, and so those all don't result in evictions, and that's due to some of these rental assistance programs. We've been focused on getting the Mills townhomes and the Amani twin home constructed. So I've been working with specifically Amani construction on the twin home on Roland and making sure they're getting through the permitting and coordinating with other city staff on that to get that project going. And then other things, I mentioned the Chasewood Villas housing improvement area. That's a pretty big lift. There's a lot of public hearings. There's a lot of outreach that goes into those, and just staff time and requirements through the state statute that you have to follow to a T to make sure that you're not breaking the law. The rental registry program, Kendall's really been leading that effort. That's been very successful. We've been through now a full cycle, and she's been sending out the reminders, so we'll touch on that a little bit later. The zoning updates, so we're going to be rewriting a zoning code, and we've been meeting, having some kickoff meetings here with staff, and then we'll be coming to you for some feedback here eventually.
Yeah, your liaison is your former chair, so he'll come and update you once in a while. He promised he would do that. So,
and then just a note that, you know, with all of these new buildings that we're constructing with affordable units, we are also tracking to make sure that they remain affordable over a term of a minimum of 30 years. So we have about 1,051 units, over 15 buildings right now that we're checking all the rent and income information on, and then 127 price restricted units. So there's a lot of tracking kind of going on behind the scenes that we are making sure they stay affordable. So for 2025 and 2026, which I hope that you fill your forms and give me some ideas for initiatives for 2025 and 26. But, you know, we still get a lot of continued interest for the down payment programs. With our median home price now at over $525,000 a year, it's really a barrier for those to have that enough equity and be able to have their down payment to get into our homes in Minnetonka. So those are some of our programs that are the most effective in ownership in the community. We're dabbling a little bit in new construction. So we have our twin home that the city owns the land, and we sought out Amani Construction to build the affordable twin home. And then we are actually, this year, a group of us is going to explore some manufactured home builders and look at that as an opportunity for additional affordable housing. So we do have a couple of sites in the community. We have 2 sites that have structures on them, and we have one other site on Baker Road that does not have a structure, and we're gonna kind of analyze what it might cost to do a manufactured home versus a traditional home on that site. So stay tuned on that. That should be exciting and just kind of a fun project to look into. We continue to support NOAA preservation. So if we have a building owner that's looking to sell or a new ownership group coming in, we're always encouraging them to think about providing affordable units in their buildings and you know, considering incentives for that. We tend to get a lot of calls about property acquisition, so we have to weigh the benefits of whether or not we need those sites or not. And then, let's see here, that kind of covers the new development. And then on the housing initiatives, we're working on the encampment policy and rental registry and all of those things in the background that I covered a little bit earlier. And then on the grant side, we just submitted a grant this week for Minnesota Housing to help support rental assistance. And that's another thing that we're continually looking for opportunities to fund things with non-city dollars. So any money we can bring to the community is great. Yes, and then lastly, one of our priorities this year is a legacy housing resource guide. So what this is, it's kind of encouraging owners of housing to think about maybe recording a covenant on their property to keep their home affordable in the long term. So this was actually, we found some examples out in Boulder, Colorado. One of the council members actually was the first one to offer her home as an affordable home long term. It's going to be more informational, not something that we're like forcing upon people, but we do get questions from time to time on people who want to preserve single family homes and how they can do it. So we're going to prep that material and make sure that we have that as a resource. So that's it on the housing. Does anyone have any questions? Go ahead.
Yes, I'm curious, Alicia, you're talking about grant opportunities for the city. Has the city ever applied for, impact funds from Minnesota Housing or development gap sources to administer?
It's been a while.
To answer your question, the city hasn't been as involved in it doing its own development. This mill, or the Amani Twin Home, is the first one we've done in, I don't know, a while, other than our partnership with Homes Within Reach. So the answer to that is probably no, because of that reason.
True.
Any other questions on the housing section? The other sections aren't as long, I promise. Yes, verbose.
Mr. Chair?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, I just was looking at that affordable housing goals charts, and I just was a little bit interested in finding out in terms of the data, the years that we use, 1995 through 2010, rental units, projects, and so on. Is there a reason we're using something that with those dates, older dates?
Commissioner Connors, yes, these are goals set out by the Met Council. So we're showing trends over time. So there is a section of the report that is 1995 through 2010, and it shows the achievement towards those housing goals. And then if we scroll down to the more recent goals, 2011 through 2020, those goals are in here, and then 2021 through 2030. So we're just kind of tracking over time how we're doing to meet those goals. And as we develop new projects and as they come online, they get added to this total. So as of last year, there were 752 new affordable rental and ownership units during this time frame. So we've met 135% of the goal. And these are Met Council goals, so they come out within those time frames.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add, Alicia, is that we keep it there for historical purposes. So even though some of the data is old, you can see what projects we're producing, some of the housing, and then it's kind of like a watch list too, like what's going to come due for your 30 years. So we do it for a couple of reasons, but mostly to track what Met Council goals were, but it does help us on other fronts to look back.
And specifically related to the housing and some of the other areas here, I understand with the state budget where it's at with some of the federal funding potential clawbacks, is there any of these programs that are having match sources that are potentially at risk or being in, I guess, in fluctuation right now?
Sure, Commissioner Cibulka, the one high-risk funding source right now is for CDBG through HUD. We're just not certain. The county's been fairly silent on that matter, but I would say the majority of the other programming comes from the city HRA levy, some tax increment pooling dollars, the state sales tax, are all pretty much local and then regional grants. So if we get any grant funding from the Met Council, that's regional. We kind of went through this exercise to see what we thought would be impacted, and HUD is the big one right now with our CDBG funding.
Which actually, if you look at the overall dollars, that's really not that much when in the context of what we're talking about. I think that the more fuzzy area for me is when you talk about Met Council, some funds are definitely federal. The ones we're accessing, we can't see that there's federal funding attached. But I think there are other funding sources out there that, you know, I think about some of the sustainability stuff we're working on, those are all federal. So there's actually we track our grants for the city council so they can see what we've applied for, what's in process, what's been awarded, and they can see where that funding is, and then they also see if it's in jeopardy. So if there's some you know, possibility of it going away. So that actually, I think that's in your packet for Monday night. The grant
I haven't
tracker.
looked at it yet.
It's okay. You don't have to read it yet. It just came out this afternoon.
And
But
then
if you're interested, it's in that report.
And maybe just to add on, there's some programs that we're just uncertain, such as some of the state programs for businesses, because there's such large pools of funding. It's been a little quiet on that front on what will happen with those programs.
That's certainly an area where I think if you're asking kind of trending issues that we should address and how can we be potentially coming up with any gaps or prioritizing those programs. I believe some of the business assistant programs were also funded through the infrastructure bill and things. So things for us to be mindful of, especially if they're being utilized by the community.
Agreed.
Could you just, for everyone's purpose, I guess, when we look at these charts and it says programs in green indicate pass-through funding, it doesn't really say what that means.
Oh, sure.
Could you just kind of give a little background of that, please?
Yeah, so these are dollars coming into the community that are not city dollars. So we may have, as we've referenced earlier, business grants that come through the state. We act as a kind of an interim funding service. So we make sure the business meets the job creation goals or the investment goals that are set out in the program before we disperse funding. But none of it comes from the community and it doesn't stay here. It goes back to the business. But then we're required to do long-term reporting on that business as kind of the piece that we're responsible for receiving those funds. And then there's things, you know, where like a fire sprinkler retrofit program where the city may lend or do a special assessment to encourage investment in those systems, and then they're paid back over time through a special assessment or in a loan or some other way so that we're being made whole at some point. And the other programs come from a variety of various sources within our programming. Does that answer your question? Good. Okay, so as you can see, we have a variety of programs on the business side. I'm just looking through here. Business advisory services come through our funds, our business outreach, our participation in the chambers. We have a sewer access charge program that helps small businesses with those sewer charges. That's a loan program. And then more recently, a commercial code compliance. And those are funded through the city. Some of them are repaid and some of them are not. But those are the ones that impact our funds here. So for 25, we had a new emergency assistance program through the levy that was launched. We've had one business utilize that service. It's really meant to be a last stop for to help a business in need. And the maximum amount is $2,500 on that program, and it's really there to be a last stop measure. The ARPA dollars that we received from COVID, we created a larger loan program it's a commercial code compliance program. So we get a lot of new restaurants and various small businesses that may have skipped a step when they went through their plans, and we come in and say, hey, what about that hood that you installed? That's not quite right. And then they might need some help from us from a loan to get the correct hood or whatever it may be in their program, or they have a sewer backup, or they have, you know, something like that. So that fund is really meant to address those issues. And then we participate in Hennepin County's Elevate and then the Open to Business program. So that's a 2-year commitment. We just re-upped our contract with them, both those organizations. So for 2025, 2026, kind of where we're at right now, as you know, we had the business survey tonight, and we plan to follow up with some action items on that and include that in the EIP, update our business contact list. So we have a great list. Kirsten's been doing a great job working with Peter and some of the other groups that have been collecting lists for us to make sure that we have up-to-date information, so that when we need to reach out to our business community, we have that. Same, kind of in the same vein as our rental registry program. We have a special goal this year to be more in contact with our large corporations. It's always tricky, as Julie knows. They don't always want to answer our phone or talk to us, and it's sometimes hard to make inroads with those larger corporations because they have a board that they answer to, and they don't always want, you know, they're not always interested in following up with us. Engaging with our culturally diverse businesses, we've been working on that the last couple of years. We just finished the commercial market analysis, so we'll follow up with those items. Kirsten's been starting to go out and canvas. She's been here not a long time, and most of that has been winter. So this summer she'll be out doing some business engaging in the community out in person. So that'll be a great initiative this summer. And then we've been participating more on a quarterly basis with the Wayzata what do they call it? West.
They changed their name.
They changed their name.
What is it
West.
now?
It's now the Wayzata West Metro Chamber.
Yes. And we're participating in those quarterly business meetings. There was just one yesterday. Mm-hmm. And that's it for business.
Just going back to the study on the real estate market, have you considered connecting to some of the brokerage community or some of the gatekeepers that potentially represent some of these corporations? Those are usually some of the more able to be reached out to individuals, and also have direct and feedback, or potentially can mitigate or manage and even connect you to the correct people.
Yeah, we have our I call them the list of 5, and they're our main go-to people. But even with those, it's not always easy either. I mean, they might know people, but then again, getting them to respond and connect with the city is another matter. So, but we keep tabs. There's 5 people I call.
Yeah, and we have logins to CoStar and some of those other tools as well. Yeah, the brokers can be very tight-lipped with things that they're working on. And so that's not always great for economic development, because we want to say, look, we have these funds that we can help you move to Minnetonka and grow your business. And so it's a balancing act. Any other questions on the business side?
Yeah, I'm just curious about the Wayzata West Metro and how the city's engaging with that. I think that's great, and my mother-in-law is the, I think, previous board chair of that organization, and so know about it a little bit. Is there, if there's opportunities for this body to engage and participate, we'd love to, at least I'd love to, if you could pass on any opportunities, just putting that out there would be great.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Anderson. I love that question because, this is a newer relationship that we have, and the quarterly business meetings are a newer event as well. So one way would be to come to those meetings. You're welcome to attend. It's a mixture of networking and also informative sessions. Yesterday was about the business survey. We often invite city staff to talk about what they're doing at the city, or other business resources can be down the road. And we have a great relationship with the Wayzata West Metro Chamber. They're very receptive to new ideas. They're proactive in their work. And so I think they are definitely open to new ideas and possibilities too, and kind of expanding upon what they've started as our foundation here.
Thank you. A follow-up question. Are the cities that are currently engaged with that organization, is that kind of fixed, or is there plans to expand this beyond the group that's currently part of it?
Is the Wayzata West Metro Chamber planning on expanding? Is
Yeah,
that
I
what
know
you mean?
I think it's a group of 5 or 6 cities around Wayzata. I don't believe Hopkins is a part of it. I'm just curious if there's intent to grow that organization.
Yeah, I think that they have, they're in a period, well, they're evolving, I would say. You can see that with their name change, right? From being the Wayzata Chamber to now being the Wayzata West Metro Chamber. And of course, their role has evolved in part too with the Twin West Chamber dissolving. So I don't know the specifics of their strategy, but I do know that they're open to more growth.
If I may add, Commissioner Anderson, I think that the other thing is, it's not just, these leadership meetings that we had like yesterday, Commissioner Haig was there as well, and those meetings are intended just for Minnetonka businesses. So that's all interaction with Minnetonka specific businesses. I think Kirsten's right, the business community is like as wide of a net as they want to. You don't have to be in a certain jurisdiction to be in the chamber. They do. What I'm impressed with is they've done this in a very quick way, that they've expanded their membership. So it's not just cities. It's, I don't know, how many businesses were there yesterday? It was, I bet there were 50 people in the audit. Would you say, Commissioner? Yeah. So about 50 people participated. That's pretty steady. So they must like what we're saying. I don't know. We always have a different topic we have to come up with. So anyway, we'd love to have everybody come. So feel free.
I was just going to add that every meeting I've been to, we've had significant presence from council and other people. So council and staff, like a half dozen people each time. So Minnetonka is representing itself well.
Okay, moving on to our transit chapter. This one is I think our lightest chapter, only because we don't do a lot of direct funding to transit. We have a agreement with Metro Transit where we opt in for service through them, and we've talked a little bit about that at our last couple of meetings. We do, however, participate and try and encourage people to use commuter services. So Julie participates on that board, and we have a contribution that's based on our population, so that's why it kind of inches up, trending up every year.
The only thing I'd interject is there was something on Channel 11 about the commuter services. I think it was on today. So if you get home and you Google commuter services, you'll probably see the kind of news clip on it. So it was kind of interesting.
Yeah, so some of the things we've been working on, Metro Transit has a Network Now plan that they're just starting to communicate publicly and provide their recommendations for transit improvements for the next 3 years, I believe it is. We've met with them. They presented to the council a ways back here a couple months ago. We're in a kind of a holding pattern with our transit planning when it comes to opening day for LRT. So that's been moved out to 2027, and we're kind of in this period where like, okay, we don't want to change the routes too much because that's only a few years away in reality. So we have an extension coming up with them in July, and that'll likely just be like a 1-year extension so that we can plan for how our routes and services connect with LRT. So it's kind of been a moving target over time, but that's kind of what we're thinking in terms of transit. And then Nelson Nygaard did a study for Minnetonka kind of in parallel to what Network Now was doing, because we wanted to make sure that the recommendations that they were projecting were the right fit for Minnetonka. So we've presented those results and really come out with looking at last mile or microtransit connections in the community, trying to connect to Opus Station and Shady Oak Station, and then cross connector routes between Opus and Ridgedale area. And then, of course, we continue to focus on our trail connection build out. So whenever we have new redevelopment, new proposals for various developments, we're always thinking about how to connect people to our existing trails, and then the signage that goes along with it, and making very sure everyone knows where they're going. In Opus. And that's what I have for transit. It's not a lot on our slide, but it's actually a huge undertaking internally on what we're kind of doing with these things. So I'll leave it to you for any questions. Okay. With none, moving on to development and redevelopment. This is primarily the fund that we use to pay for various studies and plans. So we did our transit study, the business survey, with the Nelson Nygaard study, some like comprehensive planning, and as we get closer to doing the comp plan, which I can't believe that's already around the corner, we'll need to consult with specialists on various areas of the plan, the comp plan. So that's kind of what this fund and this page is referencing. And then pre-development, sometimes we have various studies that are site-specific that we need to fund to make a development attractive to a builder or something. So yeah, that is pretty self-explanatory. The only other thing I wanted to mention is that we continue to get creative on how we display our information. So Kendall and our team has created a housing dashboard, and then we have a story map with all of our housing programs on it, and it's linked, I believe, in your staff report, so you can take a look at that. But that is information that we frequently get asked, how many housing units have you produced, or how many this or that, or what other programs do you have? What's your policy on this? What other things do you have going on? So that really is a resource for those types of resources. So, and we continue, we like trails. We did have a new TIF management report last year, so we'll make sure we incorporate those changes into the document. And that looks at all of our tax increment districts every 2 years. So opportunities, what's existing, all of that, the revenues that are coming out of that. And then Julie's working on TIF legislation for Opus. So we're keeping our fingers crossed on that. All right, and with that, we can have discussion questions tonight, or if you prefer, you can provide them later, and I will leave it to you, Chair.
Does anyone have any discussion questions currently?
Chair?
Yes, thank you.
I just, in the category of are there new trending issues EIP sure could address, something to think about is, I think the business services, like MCCD and others that are out there are great, but there's a whole nother segment that might be worth thinking about is the local nonprofit sector, and just knowing, Ann's comment about federal impacts to the city. I know there's a lot of nonprofits working in the nonprofit sector that are impacted by federal funds being frozen, and a lot of them, their general operating budgets are supported by corporate foundations, philanthropic sources, and I know that many of them right now are hurting and in need of support services. So things that come to mind like Propel Nonprofits, even MCCD's programming, just directing something specifically to the nonprofit community, the local nonprofit community, might be beneficial.
Then I would hope that we will all take a look at the questions that Alicia gave us and come up with some questions for her relative to that.
And Chair, I'm sorry, I just want to be clear for the new members. When you say things like this at a meeting, then we kind of brainstorm, gather all your ideas, brainstorm about how to address it in the plan, and then we show you what those changes are the next time you get together. So that's kind of the order of how this works.
And also for the new members, if you haven't, you can literally search the housing dashboard in the website. If you haven't looked at it, it is really an astounding tool. In fact, any of the dashboards, the crime dashboard, I mean, if you want to learn about your city, it is such a great tool, and it will make you proud of our staff and also proud of the work that this body, the council, planning commission, and other commissions have done, because as you can see in the brief overview of meeting our housing goals, we've met over 100% of our housing goals in several categories, and it's something that other cities, if they did what we did, then there wouldn't be a housing crunch. So it's just so beautiful. I mean, it's kind of exciting to look at. So I just want to encourage you to just take a peek.
Thank you. Moving on to economic development and housing updates.
Thank you. I'll try to be quick here. I know it's a late hour, so we won't keep them much longer. But it's the night of reports, so I have a report for you about what happens in community development. You know, a lot of times you only see a subsection of what we do in community development, so it's a little bit broader than economic stuff and financing and projects. So we really wanted to maybe just spend a couple of minutes here going through our year-end numbers. And I think it's a really good night to do that, because you've already heard about the commercial, you've already heard what people think of our services, and then now this is kind of the finality of what's really happening on the ground. All right, should I make it bigger? Here, can you do that for me, and then I'll manage once you get it. There you go. Thank you. There's just a note from me about what happened over the last year, and then in our planning division, this is where all the zoning applications get processed. Kind of shows you what's happening, what kinds of permitting people are asking for. We average about 107 cases. We only had 91 last year, but some of these cases take longer than you think, and so it just depends on the issue, the idea, and how involved people are. So that can vary quite a bit. What's also interesting about planning last year, I mean, for lots of years, it's been apartment after apartment, and that's shaking up. That's not the only thing we're seeing anymore. We do still see apartment projects like this one on the old Hillcrest site that's under construction right now. But we also see single family subdivisions on what I would call the hardest of the hardest to redevelop. So those get a lot of attention. We also have the Amira Villas under construction. That's right by Carlson Towers. And this was, the long process of the Mills Church we went through. Wells Fargo, if you haven't been by there, it looks really good. It's hard to envision what the site's going to look like, so that the old building's still there and the new building's still there, but stick with us. It'll look great when it's done, but for now, it's way under construction. This was an interesting one. If you didn't catch this, and this is under construction right now, where the Sprinter van kind of outlet, the Mercedes-Benz Sprinter vans, that they'll have a showroom here for that purpose. And it used to be Carpet King and various businesses, eye doctor, that sort of thing, but now it's all going to be auto-centric.
That's directly adjacent to the Sears, just to the west of it?
Right, exactly. They looked at English Rose. That project never moved ahead. There's some other ideas that developer has for a different site, so we're vetting that. Marsh Run 3 has not been through the formal process yet. They're still coming in with their plans. And then Planning Commission, we always we actually report on their attendance so that it's there for the record. In the Sustainability Division, we actually have a permanent staff member that we hired, so we're happy about that. We had some movement of staff internally, and then that opened a position here. So we now have Allie Sutherland leading that effort. Really great meeting the other night. There were lots of awards given for sustainability things, so look for that. We're working on the climate action plan. Some of the events that they had was the reuse day and drop off all your different lovely household items that you might not want anymore, but and then coordinating that with other agencies to make sure those didn't land in the landfill, but rather in a reuse situation. The commission meets every other month, that's Sustainability Commission, and then they also have ambassador and outreach events on the months that they're not meeting. So there's kind of a rhythm to how they work. So we spend a lot of time doing that. I'm not going to go over what you saw a lot of this before, so I'm not going to go over it because you know what you did. For the new commissioners, if you want to read this probably more closely, then you can kind of catch up on what we've been doing. But I think for the most part, you covered this in the EIP. That's the map of the registrations, if you didn't catch that. And then the housing loans and the housing compliance, TIF updates. I'm going to keep going. Transit study, we already talked about that. This is one we always watch. How much are we doing in terms of mailings? How many electronic subscribers do we have? That is growing modestly, but I think we probably need some new marketing efforts, hearing what we heard in the survey, and maybe ramp up. Not sure if it's the cadence of the Thrive newsletter, but we'll probably do some different things in the next year. We also do all the restaurant inspections, nuisances, you know it, like we handle that too. And so we do a lot of plan reviews. We look at a lot of facilities, or last year 567 different types of inspections that our inspectors did. We did Wayzata last year. We're done doing Wayzata. We pulled out of that contract so that we no longer have Wayzata as a client. We also have a lot of food investigations. So if you think you have a foodborne illness, that's something our staff would look at. And so we've had a few of those this year. It's not always a public-facing thing that we do, but know that somebody cares in the background and is going to check out whatever happened. Nuisance complaints were definitely up this year. We did have a lull in 2022 and 23, but for some reason they're up again this year. It just depends on how tidy people are. This is usually long grass, depends on rain, garbage cans, junk in people's yards, home businesses that shouldn't be there, that sort of thing. So that's what's happening. Now the permitting stuff. This is probably the more interesting part for you as a EDAC. There's 8,600 permits issued in a year. 2023, we're only sitting at $184 million. Last year it was $370 million. So definitely a huge uptick in what was going on. So we always kind of drill down and try to figure out what was going on, who was pulling the most permit, what types of permits were being pulled. And so that's what this commercial permitting is all about. So you can see that we had a pretty big jump here between 23 and 24. And the tenant finishes that we talked about, as well as additions or remodeling, is happening in the commercial sector at a much bigger pace than had happened previously. So in terms of 5-year average, we're well above that too in terms of the remodeling. Some of the bigger apartment projects, we're hitting the big numbers of 72 and 43 million. Greco is 23 million. Even the Kia dealership at 16 million. So, you can kind of get some of that value understanding as you look at that 380, whatever it was, hang on, I gotta go back, 370 million. We talk a lot about housing, and I always think this is an interesting number. There's only 33 new houses built in Minnetonka per year, so it's really not that huge of a sector of what's going on in permitting. So 33 last year, but boy, were they big houses. 5,400 square feet was the average area of that new construction. Average price for the permit value, again, that does not include land, $987. So new construction is way extremely high, and that doesn't seem to change. You see this? It's creeping pretty much up. Maybe a little blip from last year, but again, it's not a big sector in our economy or what's happening in the city as far as housing. Let's see. Actually, reinvestment is still pretty strong. We look at this number in single households because we want to know, are people reinvesting in their home? And that's clearly happened. It was really happening in post-pandemic and kind of in the middle of the pandemic. Then we had a huge 2023 number, 75 million. It dropped a little bit, but still that's a very strong number as compared to the prior years. And then if we look at total number of inspections, it's right in line. We probably were pretty high in 22, but 14,000 last year as far as inspections. And then we also provide some services to our little towns to the west, and so we still do that, and takes up a lot of time. We license a lot of things. We look at licensing for about 630 establishments. We also do contractor licensing for certain kinds of services, so we approve those. That's an everyday activity. We also, if you don't know, we license solicitors and people that knock on your doors, and we do backgrounding on people. You can see what's happened in that number. That's a pretty high number, 111 last year. Solicitors, that's grown. We go through periods, like during the pandemic it was pretty high, but this is the highest number I've seen in a long time. So if you don't have those signs up, they're coming to your house. So, and if you ever want to check, if you don't know that you can check online, the city has a website that shows you who solicitors are in the community right now. It'll tell you what kind of car they're driving and if they're approved by the city and the company that they're operating under. We also make sure that their backgrounds are checked to make sure they're legitimate companies and legitimate representatives. Little known fact. We spend time doing that. We also do liquor licensing. Pretty big number again. It's pretty solid. 73 and 23, and then down to almost 70 last year. And we make packets here. We like to write. We 205 reports last year. No wonder we look bleary-eyed. I don't know. Let's see, EDAC packet. You have 1,000 people that get your packet every time you have a meeting. That's a pretty good number for. It's people who are interested in the economy and finance stuff in your community. So I think that's a pretty high number. You're beating the Sustainability Commission. So, I think they looked at the same number and they're trying to beat you. So maybe there's a competition. Maybe have your friends and family sign up for the EDAC packet. Anyway, this is the best slide of the whole thing. We work with some of the smartest people, and we always list out what kind of degrees they have. We also talk about what kinds of certifications people in our department have, as well as all the committees and the leadership that people have. We actually even include some personal stuff. So, you might see somebody's the coach of their hockey team. You might see someone's in charge of their local fire department. It just depends on who it is. But I guess the point being is you've got a pretty active staff and pretty involved staff, and we're proud of that. With that, Chair, I'm going to turn it back to you if you have any questions.
Does anyone have any questions for Julie? Okay.
I don't have a question, but I have an observation, so we only started the rental registry in the last year. And for instance, over at Marsh Run 2, so a development on Wayzata Boulevard North by Staples, there are some homeowners associations just to the north that have been bringing up, that they are in owned property and that we're building all of this rental property, and so they're voicing concerns about rentals. And what was so interesting is that through the rental registry, we discovered that there is indeed rental in those owned condos. So because people are kind of renting out their condos if they're snowbirds or something, or if they just own it and they're not. So I thought, if you're doing data-based decision making, that is data we'd never have had, and it is just very, very interesting. So I just want to point that out.
That's a good point, because we kind of made educated guesses before. We use non-homesteaded data to find rental, but that's not always, it's not totally accurate, and so this is more accurate. Yeah, good point.
So just a quick I have a tendency to be more informal, and I say Julie, and I say Alicia, and I say Deb. Hopefully that doesn't bother you. Kirsten?
We will answer to anything. Thank you, Chair.
And I think also then from the commissioners, it's a lot easier to just say Jay rather than Commissioner Ramotka because nobody can pronounce it anyway. So if you're fine with that, then that's kind of the tact we'll take.
I'll second that.
All right, so as you've got your light on, you have a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second. Thank you, everybody. May 8th is our next meeting, EDAC meeting. I will not be here. Just a heads up.
And just check in with staff if you're not going to be here, please, before the meeting.
Great.
And if you could turn in your EIP sheets in about a week or so, that would be great, because I got to turn around the first draft by May 8th.